The sun beat down mercilessly on Abigail Montgomery's cracked lips as she crawled through the Nevada desert, her throat so parched she could no longer call for help. Her brother's betrayal stung worse than the sunburn ravaging her fair skin. "Water," she mouthed soundlessly, her vision blurring as distant mountains wavered like phantoms in the heat. It had been 3 days since James and Thomas Montgomery had left her to die punishment for discovering their plan to rob the bank in Silver Creek, Nevada Territory, 1875. Abigail collapsed face down in the scorching sand, her once beautiful blue dress torn and filthy. She'd stopped sweating hours ago, a dangerous sign. Her honey-blonde hair, usually pinned neatly, hung loose around her sunburnt face. At 22, she never imagined dying alone in the desert, betrayed by her own blood. She thought of her parents' graves back in Boston, how she'd promised at their funeral to keep the family together. Now James and Thomas had revealed themselves as the scoundrels some had always claimed. The railroad had brought them west 6 months ago seeking fortune, but greed had corrupted her brothers beyond redemption. Abigail's fingers clawed weakly at the ground as the sound of hoofbeats penetrated her delirium. A hallucination, she decided. Death's approach. She closed her eyes, surrendering to the inevitable. Wade Novak had been tracking the Mustang herd for 3 days when he spotted something unusual against the desert floor, a splash of blue fabric that had no business being there. Pulling his chestnut stallion to a halt, he shielded his eyes against the glare. "Whoa, Rusty," he murmured, dismounting in one fluid motion. At 28, Wade had spent half his life in the saddle, the last 5 years wrangling wild horses to sell to the army. The desert held few secrets from him, but a woman abandoned in this hellscape was something new. He approached cautiously, his spurs jingling with each step. As he drew closer, his heart raced. She wasn't moving. Wade knelt beside her, gently turning her over. Her face was badly burned, lips cracked and bleeding, but she was breathing barely. "Miss," Wade called, touching her shoulder. No response. He quickly uncorked his canteen and dribbled a few precious drops onto her parched lips. The water disappeared instantly into the cracks. He tried again, this time seeing her throat work slightly as she unconsciously swallowed. Wade glanced around, scanning the horizon. Nothing but sand, scrub, and distant mountains for miles. Whoever had left her here had meant for her to die. He clenched his jaw, anger rising in his chest. In 10 years of riding the Nevada Territory, he'd seen men do terrible things, but abandoning a woman to die of thirst was among the worst. "You're going to be all right, miss," he said, though she couldn't hear him. He lifted her carefully, alarmed at how light she felt, and carried her to his horse. His camp was 2 hours away, near the only water source in this part of the desert. Abigail dreamed she was floating. Then something cool touched her lips, the sweetest sensation she'd ever known. Water. She tried to grab for more, but her arms wouldn't move. A deep voice soothed her, but the words made no sense. Then darkness claimed her again. Wade rode carefully, cradling the unconscious woman against his chest. The sun was setting by the time they reached his camp near a small spring. He'd built a lean-to against the rock face that provided some shade. It wasn't much, but it had served him well during his Mustang hunts. He laid her gently on his bedroll and went to work. First, more water, just a few drops at a time to prevent her body from rejecting it. Next, he soaked his bandana and gently wiped her face, cleaning away the dust and cooling her sunburnt skin. Her clothes were filthy and torn, but Wade was nothing if not a gentleman. He covered her with his spare blanket and set about preparing a broth from his supplies. As night fell and stars appeared above the desert, the woman stirred. Wade moved quickly to her side, canteen ready. "Take it slow," he advised as her eyes fluttered open. They were blue, startlingly so against her reddened face. Abigail stared up at the bearded stranger leaning over her. Panic flashed through her as she tried to remember what had happened. The desert, her brothers, thirst, water, she croaked. Right here, he said, helping her sit up slightly and bringing the canteen to her lips. Small sips. The water was warm but felt like heaven sliding down her raw throat. She wanted to gulp it all, but the man controlled the flow, pulling it away after a few sips. "Who are you?" she managed, her voice barely audible. "Wade Novak, miss. Found you about 10 miles southeast of here. You were in a bad way." His voice was deep with a slight drawl that marked him as not being from the east. "Abigail Montgomery," she replied automatically. "My brothers," she stopped, pain flooding her as memories returned fully. Wade's expression hardened. "Your brothers, the ones who left you out there to die." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes and she turned away, ashamed. "Yes." Wade said nothing, just offered her another sip of water. His silence was somehow more comforting than any words could have been. "How long was I out there?" she asked after a moment. "Can't say for sure. Based on your condition, I'd guess 3 days, maybe 4. He stirred the small pot hanging over his modest fire. "Think you could manage some broth? Need to get your strength back." Abigail nodded weakly. As Wade helped her drink from a tin cup, she studied him surreptitiously. He was tall and lean, tanned by the sun, with dark hair that curled slightly where it met his collar. His beard was neatly trimmed, and despite his rough appearance, his hands were gentle as they steadied the cup. "Thank you," she said when she'd finished. "I would have died out there." "No need for thanks. Any decent man would have done the same." "You'd be surprised what decent men are capable of," she replied bitterly, thinking of her brothers. Wade frowned. "Want to tell me what happened? Might help to talk about it." Abigail hesitated, then decided this man who had saved her life deserved the truth. "My brothers and I came west from Boston 6 months ago after our parents died. James and Thomas, they changed out here, got in with a bad crowd in Silver Creek." Her voice trembled. "I overheard them planning to rob the bank. When I confronted them, She couldn't continue. "They took you out to the desert and left you," Wade finished for her, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Reckon they didn't want you informing on them." Abigail nodded, tears streaming down her face. "They're the only family I have left." Wade handed her a relatively clean handkerchief. "Family's what you make it out here, Miss Montgomery. Blood don't always count for much in the territories." As Abigail dabbed at her eyes, Wade added more wood to the fire. "You should rest. Come morning, we'll figure out what to do next." "Where will you take me?" she asked, suddenly fearful. She had no money, no possessions, and nowhere to go. Wade considered this. "There's a town called Jamestown about 3 days' ride from here. Decent folk. I do business there sometimes, selling horses to the livery. We can head that way once you're strong enough to travel." Abigail nodded, relief flooding through her. She had no idea what awaited her in Jamestown, but anything was better than dying alone in the desert or returning to Silver Creek where her brothers might finish what they'd started. "Thank you, Mr. Novak," she whispered as her eyes grew heavy. "Wade," he corrected. "Just Wade." "Wade," she repeated before sleep claimed her once more. For 3 days, Wade nursed Abigail back to health at his camp. He hunted jackrabbit for stew, gathered prickly pear fruit to supplement their diet, and made sure she drank plenty of water. With each passing day, her strength returned, and the angry red sunburn faded to a golden tan across her cheeks and arms. On the morning of the 4th day, Wade announced it was time to move on. "Mustangs I was tracking are long gone by now," he said, packing his meager supplies. "And we're running low on provisions." Abigail felt a strange mix of gratitude and apprehension. This quiet camp had become a sanctuary, and Wade, this stranger who'd saved her life, was now the only person in the world she trusted. "I can ride," she assured him, though in truth she'd never been comfortable on horseback. In Boston, she'd only ridden side saddle in the park, and the few times she'd mounted up since coming west had been nerve-wracking experiences. Wade seemed to read her discomfort. "We'll be riding double for now. Rusty's strong enough to carry us both until we reach Jamestown." The prospect of sharing a saddle with Wade made Abigail blush, but practicality overrode propriety in the desert. He helped her mount, then swung up behind her. His chest was warm against her back, his arms reaching around her to hold the reins. "Ready?" he asked, his breath tickling her ear. "Yes," she replied, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with fear. They rode north, following a route only Wade seemed to see across the seemingly featureless landscape. He pointed out landmarks invisible to her untrained eye, a certain configuration of rocks, the way the scrub grew in one direction, distant mountains that served as guideposts. "How did you learn all this?" she asked as they stopped at midday to rest the horse and eat a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. Wade shrugged. "Been riding these lands since I was 16. Started as a ranch hand down in Texas, then drove cattle north, did some scouting for the Army during the war, and finally found my calling wrangling wild horses. You learn to read the land or you die. And you never wanted to settle somewhere?" Abigail asked, curious about this solitary man who seemed so at home in the wilderness. A shadow crossed Wade's face. "Had a place once. Lost it." His tone discouraged further questions, but later, as they rode through the afternoon heat, he spoke again unprompted. "Was married young. Emma and I had a small spread in Colorado. Wasn't much, but it was ours." His voice was so low Abigail had to strain to hear it over the horse's steady pace. "Fever took her and our baby boy in '68. After that, couldn't see much point in staying put." Abigail's heart ached for him. "I'm sorry," she said simply, resisting the urge to cover his hand with hers. "Long time ago now," he replied, but she could hear the lingering pain beneath his words. That night they camped in the shelter of a large rock formation. Wade built a small fire and they ate the last of his provisions. Tomorrow, he promised, they would reach a waterhole where he could hunt for fresh meat. As the fire died down, Abigail wrapped herself in the blanket Wade had given her and watched him check his rifle before settling on the other side of the embers. The night was cold, as desert nights often are, and she shivered despite the blanket. "Cold?" Wade asked, noticing her discomfort. "A little," she admitted. "In Boston, I never imagined nights could be so cold in a place so hot during the day." Wade nodded. "Desert's full of contradictions." He hesitated, then added, "We could. That is, for warmth." Abigail felt her cheeks warm. "That would be practical," she said carefully. Wade moved his bedroll beside hers and they lay back to back, a proper distance maintained even as they shared warmth. It was the first time since her parents' death that Abigail had felt safe falling asleep. The waterhole Wade had spoken of turned out to be little more than a muddy seep, but it was enough to refill their canteens and water Rusty. Wade disappeared for an hour and returned with 2 rabbits, which he skillfully cleaned and spitted over a new fire. "We'll reach Jamestown tomorrow," he said as they ate the roasted meat. "It's small, but they've got a hotel where you can stay while you figure things out." Abigail's heart sank. She'd been avoiding thinking about what would happen once they reached civilization. She had no money, no possessions beyond the tattered dress she wore, and no skills that would be valuable in a frontier town. "I don't know what I'll do there," she confessed. "I can't pay for a hotel." Wade studied her across the fire. "You any good with numbers?" The question surprised her. Yes, actually, I kept the books for my father's shipping business back east. He nodded thoughtfully. Mac Wilson runs the general store in Jamestown. His wife passed last year, and he's been complaining about falling behind on his ledgers. Might be willing to trade room and board for help. Hope flared in Abigail's chest. You think he would hire me? Without references? My word carries some weight with Mac. I've done business with him for years. Wade took a swig from his canteen. Besides, Jamestown's short on unmarried women. Half the men in town will be falling over themselves to help you. For some reason, this observation made Abigail uncomfortable. She'd had suitors in Boston, of course, but the idea of being pursued simply for being female seemed demeaning. I don't want charity, she said firmly. I want to earn my way. Wade's eyes softened. Wasn't suggesting charity, Miss Montgomery, just stating facts, but I respect your attitude. You'll do fine out here with that kind of thinking. His approval warmed her more than it should have. Thank you, Wade, for everything. He looked away, seemingly embarrassed, just doing what needed doing. Jamestown appeared on the horizon the following afternoon, a collection of wooden buildings clustered along a single wide street, with scattered homesteads visible in the distance. It wasn't much compared to Boston, or even Silver Creek, but to Abigail, it represented hope. Wade guided Rusty down the main street, nodding to townspeople who called greetings. Several stopped to stare curiously at the woman riding double with the horse wrangler who occasionally passed through town. They stopped in front of a two-story building with Wilson's General Store painted across its wooden facade. Wade dismounted first, then reached up to help Abigail down. Her legs were stiff from days in the saddle, and she stumbled slightly, her hands grasping his shoulders for balance. For a moment they stood too close, her face tilted up to his hands still at her waist. Something flickered in Wade's dark eyes before he stepped back, clearing his throat. "Let me talk to Mac first," he said, tying Rusty to the hitching post. Abigail nodded, suddenly acutely aware of her appearance. Her dress was filthy and torn, her hair a tangled mess. She must look like a vagrant or worse. Wade seemed to read her thoughts. "You look fine," he said gruffly, "like someone who survived what would have killed most." With that surprisingly poetic observation, he led her into the store. Mackenzie Wilson turned out to be a rotund, balding man in his 60s with spectacles perched on his nose and a ledger open before him on the counter. He greeted Wade warmly, then looked curiously at Abigail. "Mac, this is Miss Abigail Montgomery," Wade introduced her. "She's had some trouble and needs a fresh start." Over the next hour, as the afternoon sun slanted through the store windows, Wade explained Abigail's situation, omitting certain details about her brothers and emphasizing her bookkeeping skills. Mac listened attentively, occasionally asking Abigail questions about her experience. "Well, Miss Montgomery," Mac said finally, "I do need help with these confounded books, and the storeroom's in disarray since Margaret passed. There's a room above the store where my daughter stayed before she married and moved to Sacramento. It's yours if you want it, along with meals and a small wage once we see how things work out." Tears of relief sprang to Abigail's eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I promise you won't regret it." "Reckon I won't," he said kindly. "Any friend of Wade's is welcome here. He's got a good eye for character." Mac glanced at the clock on the wall. "Almost closing time. Why don't I show you to your room so you can get settled? Mrs. Peterson next door might have some clothes that would fit you until you can get your own." As Mac led them to the back stairs, Abigail glanced at Wade, who remained near the door, hat in hand. She suddenly realized this was goodbye. "You're not staying in town?" she asked, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. Wade shook his head. Got business with the livery, then I'm heading out. Army contract to fill. Oh. Abigail didn't know what else to say. This man had saved her life, cared for her, and secured her a position and lodging. Yet she knew almost nothing about him beyond the bare facts he'd shared during their journey. Mac tactfully excused himself to check on something in the storeroom, leaving them alone. "I don't know how to thank you," Abigail said, crossing to where Wade stood. "You already have," he replied. "Just take care of yourself, Miss Montgomery." "Abigail," she corrected, smiling slightly. Just Abigail. The corner of his mouth lifted in an answering, almost smile. "Abigail, then." He put his hat on and turned toward the door, then paused. "I come through Jamestown every few months. I'll check on you next time I'm here." With that, he was gone, the bell above the door tinkling as it closed behind him. Abigail stood motionless, an unexpected sense of loss washing over her. In less than a week, Wade Novak had become the center of her world, and now she was alone again in a strange town. Mac returned, kindly pretending not to notice her watery eyes. "Come along, Miss Montgomery. Let's get you settled." The room above the store was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. Abigail could see Wade at the livery across the way, speaking with a tall man who must be the blacksmith. "It's not fancy," Mac apologized, "but it's private." "It's perfect," Abigail assured him. After nearly dying in the desert and sleeping on the ground, this modest room seemed like luxury. Mac's neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, proved to be a cheerful widow who arrived with an armful of dresses and undergarments. "My daughter left these when she married and moved to San Francisco," she explained. "They might be a bit old-fashioned, but they'll do until you can make or buy your own." After a blessed bath in a tin tub behind a screen in the kitchen, Abigail donned one of Mrs. Peterson's daughter's dresses, a simple blue cotton that was slightly large but clean and whole. Mrs. Peterson also helped her comb out and braid her tangled hair. "Such pretty hair," the older woman commented. "Like honey in the sunlight." That evening, Abigail joined Mac for a simple supper in the small kitchen behind the store. He was easy to talk to, asking about her life in Boston but not prying into the circumstances that had brought her west. "Wade's a good man," Max said as they washed dishes together afterward. "Known him for, must be 5 years now. Comes through a few times a year with horses for the livery or the ranches around here." "He saved my life," Abigail said simply. Mac nodded, not surprised. "He doesn't say much, but he does what's right." He dried his hands on a towel. "Well, I'll let you get some rest. Tomorrow we'll see about those ledgers." Abigail slept deeply that night, exhausted from the journey and emotional upheaval. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the small window. For a moment she was disoriented, then remembered where she was and how she had come to be there. She dressed quickly in another of the borrowed dresses and made her way downstairs. The store was already open, with Max serving a customer. He greeted her with a smile and gestured toward the back room once the customer had left. "Breakfast's on the stove, and those are the ledgers on the desk. Take your time getting acquainted with them. Store closes at noon for an hour if you want to explore the town a bit." Over the next few days, Abigail fell into a routine. Mornings were spent organizing the chaotic ledgers, afternoons helping in the store or sorting the storeroom. Mac was a kind employer, patient when she made mistakes and generous with praise when she resolved long-standing accounting errors. Jamestown proved to be a friendly community. Abigail met the doctor and his wife, the schoolteacher, the blacksmith and his family, and various ranchers and townspeople who frequented the store. Several single men made their interest known, but Abigail politely deflected their attention. Her heart wasn't ready for such considerations. A week after her arrival, As she was sweeping the store's front porch, a familiar figure on a chestnut horse appeared at the end of the street. Abigail's heart leaped before she could control her reaction. Wade had returned sooner than expected. He dismounted in front of the store, looking much as he had when he left, perhaps a bit dustier. "Miss Montgomery," he greeted her, removing his hat. "You're looking well." Indeed, she was. Regular meals, decent sleep, and safety had restored her. The sunburn had faded to a light tan, and the borrowed clothes, while not fashionable, were clean and neat. "Mr. Novak," she replied, unable to keep the smile from her face. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon." "Had some business conclude faster than expected," he said vaguely. "Thought I'd check in on you before heading out again." Mac emerged from the store and greeted Wade warmly. "Perfect timing. I was just about to close for lunch. Why don't you join us?" Over a simple meal of bread, cheese, and cold meat, Wade explained he'd delivered horses to a ranch 20 miles north and would be heading to Carson City next to meet with an Army purchasing agent. "How long will you be gone?" Abigail asked, then blushed at how forward the question sounded. Wade didn't seem to mind. "Month, maybe 2. Depends on how long it takes to round up enough Mustangs to satisfy the contract." Mac excused himself after eating, mentioning paperwork that needed attention, leaving Wade and Abigail alone in the kitchen. "You seem to be settling in," Wade observed. "Yes, Mr. Wilson has been very kind and the townspeople have welcomed me." Abigail hesitated, then added, "I've been wondering about my brothers, if they went through with the robbery." Wade's expression darkened. "I asked around. There was a bank robbery in Silver Creek 3 weeks ago. 2 men were killed, a teller and a customer who tried to intervene." Abigail gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh God, James and Thomas got away with about $4,000, Wade confirmed grimly. "There's a posse still looking for them, but they've likely fled the territory by now." Tears filled Abigail's eyes. Her brothers were not just thieves but murderers. Whatever faint hope she'd harbored that they might have abandoned their plan died in that moment. "I'm sorry," Wade said softly. "Thought you should know." Abigail nodded, wiping her eyes. "Thank you for telling me. I needed to know the truth." She took a deep breath. "If they are ever caught, I'll testify against them. What they've done, what they did to me, it can't go unpunished." Wade studied her face, respect evident in his eyes. "That takes courage." "Not as much as surviving in the desert," she replied with a small smile. "You taught me I'm stronger than I thought." Something shifted in Wade's expression, a softening around his eyes, a slight parting of his lips as if he wanted to say something important. But then the store bell jingled, indicating a customer had entered despite the closed sign. "I should go," Wade said, standing. "Got supplies to gather before heading out." Abigail walked him to the door, acutely aware that it might be months before she saw him again. At the threshold, he turned to her. "Take care, Abigail," he said, her name sounding different in his deep voice. "You too, Wade. Be safe." He nodded once, settled his hat on his head, and walked away. Abigail watched him go, an unfamiliar ache in her chest. 2 months passed, during which Abigail became an integral part of Jamestown. Her organization transformed the store's operations, and Mac frequently commented he didn't know how he'd managed without her. She made friends, particularly with Emily Johnson, the schoolteacher, and attended Sunday services at the small church. She thought of Wade often, wondering where he was, if he was safe. The desert was dangerous, full of natural threats and human ones as well. Bandits, renegades, and hostile Native Americans all posed risks to a man traveling alone. One evening in late September, as Abigail was closing the ledger for the day, Mac entered the back room with a letter in hand. Mail came. "This one's addressed to you, care of the store." Surprised, Abigail took the envelope. The handwriting was unfamiliar, masculine, and somewhat crude, as if the writer wasn't accustomed to correspondence. There was no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a short message. Miss Montgomery found a Mustang herd near the Sierra foothills. Expect to be in Jamestown by mid-October with horses for Thompson's ranch. Hope this finds you well. Respectfully, W. Novak. Abigail read the brief note 3 times, a smile spreading across her face. It wasn't much, just a few lines, but the fact that Wade had taken the time to write, to let her know he was coming back, warmed her heart. Mac watched her reaction with knowing eyes. Good news. Mr. Novak will be returning in October, she said, trying to sound casual. Mac nodded, hiding a smile. Been wondering when he'd show up again. Longest he stayed away since I've known him. October brought cooler weather and increasing excitement for Abigail. She found herself watching the road more often, starting at the sound of horses passing by the store. It was foolish, she knew. Wade was simply a kind man who had helped her in dire circumstances. His interest in her welfare was nothing more than common decency. Yet her heart refused to listen to reason. Mid-October came and went with no sign of Wade. By the end of the month, Abigail had resigned herself to disappointment. Perhaps he'd changed his plans, found better prices for his horses elsewhere, or the thought chilled her met with some accident in the wilderness. Then, on the first day of November, as early snow flurries danced in the air, the door to Wilson's General Store opened, and Wade Novak stepped inside, bringing the scent of horses and open spaces with him. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance. His beard was neatly trimmed, his clothes, while worn, were clean, and his dark hair was freshly cut. But it was his eyes Abigail noticed most, the way they lit up when they found her behind the counter. Miss Montgomery, he greeted her, removing his hat. Mr. Novak, she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. We were beginning to think you weren't coming. Had some trouble with the Army contract. Then the weather turned in the mountains. Had to take a longer route. He glanced around. Mac around. He's visiting his daughter in Sacramento. Won't be back until next week. Abigail came out from behind the counter. I'm minding the store while he's away. Wade nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable. I brought something for you. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. Saw it in Carson City. Thought you might like it. Surprised, Abigail accepted the gift. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal with a pen and small inkwell. It's lovely, she said, genuinely touched. Thank you. Noticed you writing in that old ledger sometimes. Figured you might want something of your own to write in. He shifted his weight, clearly unaccustomed to giving gifts. Thought maybe you could write down your stories. You've had quite a journey. The thoughtfulness of the gift nearly brought tears to Abigail's eyes. I don't know what to say. Don't need to say anything, Wade assured her. Just, glad you're doing well here. A customer entered the store then, and Abigail reluctantly returned to her duties. Wade browsed the shelves, selecting supplies, occasionally stealing glances at her as she worked. When the customer left, he approached the counter with his purchases. I'll be in town a few days. Delivering horses to Thompson tomorrow, then got some business with the blacksmith. Abigail's heart lifted at the news. Where are you staying? Usually camp outside town, but with the weather turning. He shrugged. The hotel has rooms, she suggested. Or, she hesitated, then plunged ahead. Mac keeps a spare room for guests. Since he's away, I'm sure he wouldn't mind if you used it. It would be more comfortable than camping in the snow. Wade looked surprised, then pleased. Wouldn't want to impose. It's not imposing. It's the least I can offer after everything you've done for me. That evening, after closing the store, Abigail prepared a simple dinner while Wade stabled his horse behind the building. They ate together in the small kitchen, an oddly domestic scene that felt both strange and completely natural. "Tell me about your travels," Abigail urged as they washed dishes together. "I've hardly left town since arriving." Wade described the high mountain meadows where he'd tracked the Mustang herd, the crystal-clear lakes and forests that seemed to touch the sky. He spoke of encounters with wildlife, a bear that had nearly surprised him at his campfire, a mountain lion that had stalked him for miles before losing interest. "Sounds wonderful and terrifying," Abigail commented when he finished. "I've never seen mountains like that." "Maybe someday you will," Wade said, his eyes meeting hers briefly before looking away. There was an awkward moment as they prepared to retire for the night. The spare room was across from Abigail's, separated by a narrow hallway. As she handed Wade extra blankets, their fingers brushed, sending a jolt of awareness through her. "Thank you for the journal," she said again, needing to fill the silence. "It's the nicest gift I've received in a long time." "You're welcome." He hesitated, then added, "Good night, Abigail." "Good night, Wade." Sleep was elusive that night, knowing Wade was just across the hall. Abigail tried to analyze her feelings for this quiet, honorable man who had literally saved her life. Was it mere gratitude she felt, or something deeper? Wade stayed in Jamestown for 5 days, delivering the horses, helping the blacksmith with a difficult job, and making repairs around the store that Mac had been putting off. Each evening, he and Abigail shared dinner and conversation, growing more comfortable in each other's company. On his last night in town, as snow fell steadily outside, Abigail found the courage to ask about his plans. "Where will you go next?" Wade stared into the fire burning in the small stove. "South, probably. Weather's turning too cold for horse hunting in the mountains." "Will you come back to Jamestown?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Wade turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Do you want me to?" Abigail's heart raced. "Yes," she admitted softly. "I would like that very much." The room seemed suddenly too warm, too small. Wade set his coffee cup down and moved to sit beside her on the small sofa. "Abigail," he began, his voice lower than usual. "I'm not good with words, never have been. But these past months I found myself thinking about you, wondering if you were all right, if you were happy here." "I am," she assured him. "Thanks to you." He shook his head. "You did the hard part yourself, surviving, building a new life. A life I wouldn't have if you hadn't found me in the desert." Wade's hand moved to cover hers. "I've been alone a long time. After Emma died, I didn't think I'd ever want to care for someone again. But then I found you." Abigail's breath caught. "Wade." "I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "Just wanted you to know. I care what happens to you, more than I should, maybe." Gathering her courage, Abigail turned her hand over so their palms met, fingers intertwining. "I care about you too." The kiss, when it came, was gentle, a question rather than a demand. Abigail answered by leaning into it, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling his heartbeat accelerate beneath her palm. When they pulled apart, Wade's eyes were dark with emotion. "I should go back to California after delivering these horses," he said, his voice rough. "Got work lined up there, but I could come back in the spring." "That's a long time," Abigail whispered. "Yes," he agreed, "too long." The implication hung in the air between them. She could go with him. Leave the safety of Jamestown for an uncertain future with a man she was just beginning to know. It was reckless, perhaps even foolish. "I need to think," she said finally. Wade nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course. I wouldn't ask you to decide something like this quickly." He stood, reluctantly releasing her hand. "I'll be leaving at first light. The pass might close if this snow keeps up." That night, Abigail barely slept, weighing her options. She'd found security in Jamestown, respect, and a position where her skills were valued. Mac treated her almost like a daughter. She had friends, a community. But when she thought of Wade leaving, possibly not returning until spring if at all, her chest ached with a hollowness she couldn't ignore. Before dawn, she made her decision. Quietly packing a small bag with essentials and the journal Wade had given her, she wrote a lengthy letter to Mac explaining her choice and thanking him for his kindness. She left it propped against the store ledger, where he would find it upon his return. Wade was saddling Rusty behind the store when Abigail emerged, bag in hand. He stared at her, then at the bag, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You sure about this?" he asked, his voice careful, controlled. "No," she admitted with a small smile. "But I'm sure I want to find out where this leads, where we might lead." Joy broke across his face like sunrise. In 2 strides he was before her, gathering her into his arms. "I can't offer much," he warned against her hair. "It'll be a hard life, at least at first." "I nearly died in the desert," she reminded him. "Everything since then has been a gift. I'm not afraid of hardship." They left Jamestown as the sun crested the mountains, the snow having tapered off during the night. Abigail rode behind Wade, her arms around his waist, her cheek pressed against his back. It wasn't proper or conventional, but nothing about their relationship had been. The journey south was challenging but exhilarating. They traveled by day and camped at night, sometimes in small settlements, other times under the stars. Wade taught Abigail how to build a fire, how to read the weather from the clouds, how to spot game trails in the wilderness. In return, she shared stories of her childhood in Boston. Her dreams before tragedy had altered her path, and her growing feelings for the quiet horseman who had saved her life. They reached California's Central Valley as winter settled in fully across the mountains behind them. The land here was greener, the climate milder. Wade had connections with several ranches where his skills with horses were valued. They found work at the Thompson Ranch near the small settlement of Madera, Wade breaking horses, Abigail keeping the books for the ranch's expanding operations. The ranch owner, impressed with their work ethic, offered them the use of a small cabin on the property. It wasn't much, 2 rooms with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn furniture, and a small garden plot, but it was theirs. Together, they made it a home, adding small touches that reflected their growing bond. In the evenings, Abigail would write in her journal while Wade whittled by the fire or mended tack. Sometimes they talked, other times they simply enjoyed the comfortable silence between them. It was a simple life, but a good one. Spring brought news from Jamestown. Mac had received Abigail's letter and, while disappointed to lose her, wished her happiness. He enclosed a letter of reference praising her skills, should she need employment elsewhere, and a small packet of seeds from Mrs. Peterson for her garden. "He's a good man," Wade commented after reading the letter. "Treated you well." "Yes," Abigail agreed. "I was fortunate to find kindness twice in my journey west." As spring blossomed into summer, their relationship deepened. Wade spoke more openly about his past, his childhood in Missouri, his brief marriage to Emma, the grief that had driven him to a solitary life in the wilderness. Abigail shared her fears about her brothers, wondering if they had escaped justice or if the law had caught up with them. One warm evening in June, as they sat on the small porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Wade took Abigail's hand. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice holding an unusual note of nervousness, "about the future, our future." Abigail's heart quickened. "Oh, I've saved most of what I've earned these past months. There's land for sale about 10 miles south of here. Good water, decent grazing, Could be a nice spot for a horse ranch. Your own ranch, Abigail clarified, excitement building in her chest. Wade nodded. Our own ranch. If you want that kind of life, with me. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small gold band. It's not fancy, but it's perfect, Abigail whispered, tears filling her eyes as he slipped it onto her finger. Yes, Wade. Yes to all of it. They were married by a traveling minister the following week, with the Thompson family and a few ranch hands as witnesses. The ceremony was simple, but Abigail felt a joy she had never expected to find after the tragedy of her brother's betrayal. That night, as husband and wife, they talked of their future, the ranch they would build, the horses Wade would raise, the family they hoped to create together. Never thought I'd have this again, Wade admitted, holding her close. After Emma died, I figured that part of my life was over. And I never expected to find love in the desert, Abigail replied. It seems we were both wrong in the best possible way. They purchased the land Wade had mentioned and set about building their dream. It was hard work clearing the ground, constructing a modest house, fencing paddocks for horses, but they tackled it together. Wade continued breaking horses for neighboring ranches while establishing their own stock, and Abigail kept meticulous records of their fledgling business. News reached them in late autumn that James and Thomas Montgomery had been captured in Mexico and extradited to Nevada territory to face charges for the bank robbery and murders. Abigail received a summons to testify about their actions toward her. I'll go with you, Wade said immediately when she showed him the official letter. It means facing them again, Abigail said, her voice trembling slightly. Looking them in the eyes after what they did. Wade's arm tightened around her shoulders. You're stronger than they are, always have been. The trial in Carson City was brief, but intense. Abigail testified clearly and unflinchingly about her brother's plans to rob the bank and their attempt to silence her by abandoning her in the desert. Wade's testimony about finding her near death corroborated her account. James and Thomas, haggard and defeated in the dock, couldn't meet her gaze. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before finding them guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced them to hang. After the verdict, Abigail requested a moment with her brothers. In a guarded room, she faced them one last time. I loved you both, she said simply, but you chose greed over family, over basic humanity. We never thought you'd die out there, Thomas claimed weakly. We thought someone would find you before. That doesn't excuse what you did, Abigail replied, her voice steady. To me or to those innocent men at the bank. James, always the prouder of the two, finally looked at her directly. You seem to have landed on your feet, he observed bitterly. Found yourself a protector. I found a husband, Abigail corrected. A man of honor, something you would know nothing about. She left without a backward glance, finding Wade waiting in the hallway. He took her hand without a word, and together they walked out into the bright winter sunlight. Are you all right? He asked as they made their way back to their hotel. Abigail considered the question carefully. I think I am, she said finally. It feels like closing a chapter, the last tie to a life that's no longer mine. They returned to California and their budding ranch, renewed in their commitment to building something positive from the ashes of tragedy. Spring brought new foals to their growing herd and news that Abigail was expecting their first child. A baby, Wade repeated when she told him, wonder in his voice as he placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. Our baby. Are you happy? She asked, though his glowing face already answered her question. More than I ever thought possible, he replied, gathering her close. When I found you in that desert, I was just doing what seemed right. I never imagined you'd change my life so completely. Their son, William, was born on a clear autumn day, with a neighbor woman assisting and Wade pacing anxiously outside until the baby's first cry rang out. When he was finally allowed to enter, the sight of Abigail holding their child tiny, perfect, with a dusting of dark hair like his father's brought tears to Wade's eyes. "He's beautiful," he whispered, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed and touching his son's miniature fingers with wonder. "He looks like you," Abigail said, smiling tiredly. Wade shook his head. "He's got your spirit, I can tell already." He brushed a strand of hair from her damp forehead. "Thank you for this life, Abigail, for our family." As William grew from infant to toddler, the Novak ranch prospered. Wade's reputation for quality horses spread, bringing buyers from as far away as San Francisco. They expanded their holdings, built a larger house, and hired hands to help with the increasing workload. Abigail continued to keep the ranch books, but also found time to write stories of their adventures, tales of the desert, of horse wrangling, of building a life from nothing. Sometimes in the evenings, she would read them aloud to Wade and William, embellishing here and there to make them more exciting for their young son. When William was 3, the family traveled to Jamestown for a visit. Mac Wilson, now in his 70s but still running the general store with the help of a young assistant, was overjoyed to see Abigail again and to meet her family. "Always knew you two were meant for each other," he declared as they sat in his kitchen, much as they had years before. "Saw it the moment Wade brought you into town." Abigail exchanged an amused glance with her husband. "You saw more than we did then." "Sometimes it takes an outside perspective," Max said with a wink at William, who was busy exploring the unfamiliar kitchen. They spent a week in Jamestown, reconnecting with old friends and introducing William to the town where his parents' story had truly begun. Many things had changed, new buildings, new faces, but the warmth of the community remained. On their last evening, Wade suggested they ride out to the spot where he had found Abigail in the desert years before. It was a solemn journey, with William safely ensconced in front of his father on Rusty's successor, a gentle bay gelding. The desert looked different to Abigail now, not just a place of fear and death, but a landscape with its own harsh beauty. When they reached the approximate location where Wade had discovered her, they dismounted. "This is where Papa found Mama," Wade explained to William, who looked around curiously at the seemingly unremarkable stretch of sand and scrub. "She was very brave and strong." William nodded solemnly, though he couldn't possibly understand the significance. Abigail knelt beside her son, taking his small hands in hers. "Sometimes bad things happen," she told him gently, "but they can lead to good things too. If Papa hadn't found me here, we wouldn't have you." Wade placed a hand on her shoulder, and Abigail covered it with her own. Together, they stood in the desert that had nearly claimed her life, but had instead given her a new one, a life filled with love, purpose, and family. As they rode away, Abigail glanced back once at the sun setting over the distant mountains, painting the desert in gold. The sight no longer filled her with fear, but with a deep appreciation for the journey that had brought her to this moment. "Ready to go home?" Wade asked, riding alongside her with William now dozing against his chest. "Yes," Abigail replied, smiling at her husband and son. "Let's go home." 2 more children joined the Novak family in the years that followed: a daughter, Elizabeth, and another son, James, named not for Abigail's brother but for Wade's father. Their ranch became one of the most successful in the region, known for its fine horses and the couple's fair business practices. Wade taught all 3 children to ride almost before they could walk, and Abigail ensured they received proper schooling, hiring a tutor when the local school proved inadequate. As the children grew, so did the stories of how their parents met the tale of the woman abandoned in the desert, and the horseman who saved her becoming almost legendary among their friends and neighbors. William, especially, loved to recount it to anyone who would listen, adding dramatic embellishments with each telling. "You've created a family storyteller," Wade commented one evening after hearing their eldest son regale a visitor with a particularly colorful version of their meeting. "He comes by it honestly," Abigail replied, glancing at the bookshelf where several published volumes now sat, collections of her frontier tales that had found favor with Eastern publishers hungry for authentic Western stories. Her writing had become more than a hobby, bringing in additional income for the family and giving Abigail a voice beyond the ranch. Her most popular work, Abandoned, was a thinly veiled account of her own experience, though with a more dramatic villain than her brothers had been. Wade, though proud of her success, remained the same quiet, steadfast man who had found her in the desert, more comfortable with horses than people, more expressive with actions than words. But with Abigail, he had learned to share his thoughts, his fears, his dreams. On their 20th anniversary, Wade surprised Abigail with a special gift, a silver locket containing miniature portraits of their children on one side, and on the other, a tiny piece of desert sand encased in glass. "To remember where we started," he explained as he fastened it around her neck. "And how far we've come." Abigail touched the locket, tears in her eyes. "I never thought when you found me dying in the desert that this would be my life," she said softly, "that we would build all this together." Wade's arms encircled her, as strong and steady as they had been when he'd first carried her to safety. "When I gave you my water that day, I was just trying to save your life," he said against her hair. "I had no idea you'd end up saving mine." As they stood together on the porch of the home they had built, watching their children with the horses in the paddock beyond, Abigail reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. Her brother's betrayal, intended to end her life, had instead led her to a fuller, richer existence than she could have imagined. The desert, that should have been her grave, had become the birthplace of her happiest days. The abandoned woman had found not just rescue but love, family, and purpose in the arms of the man who had once been a stranger, offering water to a dying soul. "I love you, Wade Novak," she whispered, leaning into his embrace. "For the man you were when you found me, and for the man you've become in all the days since." "And I love you, Abigail Novak," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "For the woman who survived against all odds, and for all the years you've spent by my side, making every day better than the last." As the sun set over their ranch, painting the sky in the same golden hues that had colored the desert on that fateful day, Abigail knew with absolute certainty that some journeys, though they begin in darkness and despair, can lead to the brightest of destinations if you're fortunate enough to find the right companion for the trail.